Hi everyone, it's Miss Candarin here at her house, missing everyone and wishing that we were in school together. But today is my first little mini lesson. If you didn't get the enrichment packet, I'm going to talk about one of the first activities that you can do at home. I wrote the objective up here and it says, "Who is your hero and why?" If you're not sure what a hero is someone that you look up to, someone that has maybe helped you. If you remember, we did the inspiring letters. You chose someone who inspires you and you wrote a letter to them. Maybe it was your mom, maybe it was your dad, maybe it was your sister or brother, a police officer. So a hero is kind of like a person who inspires you. So I am going to read a book called Harriet Tubman. If you are not familiar with her, she was a famous woman who helped a lot of slaves, and she helped them escape from slavery back then in the past. And I'm going to read this awesome informational book about Harriet Tubman because it gives us information, real facts that are true about her life. A lot of people might consider Harriet Tubman a hero of theirs because she helped them. She was very brave because she went back down to the South and helped those slaves escape. And she could have gotten caught as well and got back into slavery, but she risked her lives to save a lot of other people's. So a lot of people would consider her a hero. So let's read this awesome informational book together about Harriet Tubman. This is the table of contents here. This is something that you'll find in an informational book or a fiction book, and it tells us what page different topics are on. So this is really important to look at if you're doing or reading an informational book. So who was Harriet Tubman? Harriet Tubman was a brave woman who lived long ago. She risked her life to help many black slaves escape from the South to the North, where they could be free. It shows some really awesome photos, real pictures of Harriet Tubman. Early life. Harriet was born a slave. Harriet's mother and father were also slaves. Harriet's parents worked on a large farm called a plantation. And later on, this word is darker. It's called bold print. And a lot of those words that are bolded are in something called a glossary, which is a little dictionary that will give you the definition for that word later on. Slaves on the plantation had to work very hard to please their master. The master was the man who owned the plantation. Slaves could be sold to another master. And over here, we're going to read that as well because that's also important to read too. Plantations often grew crops such as cotton. Here, slaves are putting the cotton into a cotton gin. Now, a cotton gin is where they separate the cotton from its seeds so that they can use the cotton to make different things such as clothes. When Harriet was about 5 years old, she had to start working on the plantation. At first, she worked in the master's house. When she got older, she was sent outside to work on the farm. She drove a wagon, plowed fields, and moved heavy logs. One day, Harriet suffered a head injury. Because she was a slave, Harriet was not taken to a doctor. 2 days later, even though she was still badly hurt, Harriet had to go back to work. Harriet had problems from this head wound for the rest of her life. So because she was a slave, they didn't take them to the doctors. How awful is that? Freedom. Harriet married a man named John Tubman. John was not a slave. He was a free black man. Then Harriet became sick. She was worried that she would be sold to another master, so she decided to run away. She traveled to the north where she thought she could find freedom. Harriet didn't have a map to go north. Instead, she followed the North Star. She hid during the day and walked at night. This would be a great time to ask an I wonder question. I wonder how Harriet Tubman was feeling as she was traveling north. She didn't know where she was going, and she was just following this star. So I wonder how she felt. Harriet met people along the way who helped her. They gave her food to eat and hid her from people who were trying to catch her. Finally, after traveling for several weeks, Harriet reached the northern city of Philadelphia. Some of you might know that city. Harriet was very happy to reach freedom. And I'm going to read these two as well, because again, it's also important not just to read the text, but also important extra information too. The Underground Railroad was a secret group of routes that black slaves used to escape from the south to the north. And up here it says, this is what Harriet said about how it felt to reach the north. Now this is going to be in quotation marks because this is something that she actually said. When I found I had crossed that line, I looked at my hands to see if I was the same person. There was such a glory over everything. The sun came like gold through the trees and over the fields, and I felt like I was in heaven. Now there, she used a simile, if you remember, compares two things using like or as. Conductor. Here we see our OR suffix. OR means a person who or more, like teacher, a person who teaches. That OR. Miss Cameron just had a brain fart. OR means a person who, like doctor, a person who helps us when we're sick. I just did ER. I'm so silly. So a conductor, a person who conducts, okay? Now we had conductor as one of our vocabulary words from Oliver Olson, but a conductor can also help lead people like a conductor does in an orchestra. She was a conductor. She didn't lead people in an orchestra, in a band, but she led people to freedom. Harriet wanted to help her family and other slaves escape to freedom. She began to make trips back to the South, which was very dangerous. If caught, she would have been sent back to her master. During her trips, she found people who would help hide runaway slaves. Since Harriet would guide the people to freedom, she was called a conductor of the Underground Railroad. For 11 years, Harriet traveled from north to the south, helping her family and other slaves escape. Down here it says, many homes along the Underground Railroad route were used as safe places for escaped slaves to stay, such as this home in Charlemont, Massachusetts. So that's a real house where people would hide some of the slaves. Harriet had clever ways to make sure her trips were successful. She worked mostly in winter months when the nights were long and dark. She started out on Saturday nights, since notices about runaway slaves wouldn't be placed in newspapers until Monday morning. So she started early because other people wouldn't know she would have escaped. Once on a train, she saw her old master. Oh my goodness. Everyone knew Harriet could not read. So she picked up a newspaper and pretended to read it. The man did not notice her. Up here it says, Harriet made as many as 13 trips to the South to help slaves escape. People began to tell stories of how brave she was and started calling her Moses, after the person in the Bible that led people to freedom. He was a real person that led people to freedom. The later years. In 1859, Harriet bought a farm in New York where she brought her family and friends to live. There was a war between the North and the South. The North wanted the slaves to be free. Harriet helped the North by working as a cook and a nurse. The war went on for a long time. Finally, the North won the war, and the slaves were free. The law changed so slaves no longer had to work for a master. Now they could live and work wherever they chose. After the war, Harriet went back to New York. For the rest of her life, Harriet continued to help Black men and women make new lives as free people. If you open this up, I love these informational books. It has something called a timeline. It has specific dates and what happened on those dates. So let's read that too. It says in 1820, Harriet is born to slave parents. In 1844, Harriet marries a free Black man named John Tubman. In 1849, Harriet escapes from the plantation in Maryland and travels to Philadelphia. In 1850, Harriet begins to guide other slaves to freedom. In 1858, Harriet shares details of the Underground Railroad with John Brown, who planned raids on slaveholders in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. 1860, Harriet conducts her last rescue mission. 1863, Harriet serves as a cook, nurse, and leader in the American Civil War. And 1913, Harriet dies at her farm in Auburn, New York. She was 93. So, back here, we have the glossary. So it has the definition of the bold printed words. And then here is an index. This is something that has just some maybe important words that you might be looking for, and then what page you might be able to find them on back in the book. So, something you could ask yourself too is a fact that you learned about Harriet Tubman, because this is an informational nonfiction story, and something new that you learned about her that you might not have learned before. So like Miss Candorin said, Harriet Tubman was a hero to a lot of people. So now I want to ask you, who is your hero and why? It could be, again, someone that you wrote about that's inspired you, or it could be someone different. Who has helped you? Who do you look up to? I actually was talking to Mrs. Moser earlier, and she talked about how Miss Dara could be a lot of people's heroes because she helps them. She gives out food, right? She gives out drinks. She goes and helps places. She goes and drives people around and helps them who don't have cars. So Miss Dara would be a great example for someone to be for her to be someone's hero. If you do this, here's a couple ways that you could answer this question. I have here. You could make a short video, not as long as Miss Candorin's. It doesn't have to be, just you talking about who is your hero and why. You could write your answer, and a sentence starter would be, my hero is blank because. And you could write a few sentences about who your own hero is. You could draw a picture of your hero, and if you wanted to take it a step further, you could write underneath that picture about your hero and why, or you can even take a video or a picture of your picture and send it. You could also create a song. I thought that one was really creative. If you want to get super creative with Miss Candorin, you could create a song about your hero. So those are some ways that you could answer this question of who is your hero. And you could send it through Dojo, or you could email it to me. You can ask your parents what my email is. And I'm also going to be setting a number up that you can text me, and you could send me your answers. So I'm really excited to see some of your answers and and who your hero would be. I hope you enjoyed our first session together. I miss all of you guys so much. Also, here's my cat shirt. It said, "Cats make the world a better place." Of course, I don't wear my cat shirt. So I hope you enjoyed our first session, and I look forward to hearing from all of you. Bye!